Hi, I'm Laura Friedman. I'm the president of the Morningside Heights Community Coalition, and welcome to our town hall meeting. In 2016, a group of Morningside Heights neighbors came together to fight against the onslaught of luxury housing and to advocate for more affordable housing here in the Heights. Tonight, we're going to get some brief updates about what the coalition has been working on in addition to the rezoning study. And then, of course, the main event is the rezoning study. I also just want to introduce Lizette Chaparro from the Manhattan Borough President's Office, who's been really amazing in working with us on this plan, as well as Andrea Brecker of our executive committee. So we have a good evening plan. I want to begin by introducing Dave Robinson. He is a vice president and member of the executive committee. He does an incredible amount of work, but tonight he's going to be specifically speaking about two things. He's our representative to the Morningside Heights Community Fund, and he is also going to talk about the candidates poll. So Dave, we're on with you.
Okay, thanks very much everybody for being here tonight. I'm going to talk very briefly about two different things. The first is the Morningside Heights Community Fund, which exists out of community benefits agreements we have, or at least one community benefits agreement we have and one contribution. Community benefits agreement is with Union Theological Seminary and Lend Lease, a development company. The contribution is from Jewish Theological Seminary. These come because each of these institutions enabled a high-rise tower with no affordable housing. And after a considerable amount of persuasion, quote unquote, on our part, they were convinced that they should do something to mitigate the harmful impact of these towers. So they contributed to a fund, which we have now set up at the New York Community Trust. And we have, over the past year, really, we have made contributions totaling $145,000 to 16 organizations in Morningside Heights and West Harlem. And those organizations have provided food to people that are hungry, preschool and after-school services, services to senior citizens from a number of different organizations. And we've placed a special emphasis on dealing with the aftermath of the COVID crisis, organizations that have really risen to the occasion for people in our community that have suffered in the pandemic. We are hoping to start another round of grants later in the summer, and we look forward to hopefully further contributions from other developers in the neighborhood. We're very excited about this project. We actually haven't had a chance to meet some of the organizations that we've actually given grants to because of pandemic restrictions. We're hoping to see them at our community fair that's coming up in July that Dan McSweeney is going to talk about in a few minutes. The second thing I'm going to talk about is, as you hopefully know, we have an election coming up shortly, a primary election in our neighborhood. And District Council District 7 is extremely important for us. We've worked very closely with Mark Levine over the past 5 years. He's been instrumental in all of our accomplishments. We're looking forward to having a successor to Mark that also champions our causes. We sent out a poll to the candidates highlighting our positions on affordable housing and rezoning, both of which you're going to hear in more detail in a little bit. But we received responses from 7 of the candidates who are listed on your screen below in alphabetical order. And you can read each of their responses at the on our website or at the link below that is also on the screen. We encourage you to to read those responses and help form your opinion about who to vote for. The election is coming up June 22nd. Early voting is June 12th to June 20th. It's very important that people vote. And whoever wins the primary and the election, we will work with them closely to advance the needs and interests of everyone in Morningside Heights and West Harlem and throughout the council district. Now I'm going to turn it over to Harry Schwartz, a member of our executive committee and a experienced activist who will talk about our affordable housing initiatives.
Thank you. Good evening, fellow Morningsiders. I want to talk about affordable housing. Many paths lead us to the importance of affordable housing. Our town hall meetings, it's always stressed. The surveys we've taken show that affordable housing is important, and our tabling. In addition, we have some statistical evidence in Community Board 9, and you'll hear about some of that later. So at this point, there are almost 800 units of housing being built in Morningside Heights in 5 locations. The latest one is the McDonald's site, where Columbia started building a 34-story tower about 2 weeks ago. Not one of these 800 units is going to be affordable, not a single one. So that led us to consider how we can best achieve affordable housing in Morningside Heights. We formed what we call an umbrella campaign. It's called Just Housing, J-U-S-T in capitals and housing. It has 5 elements right now, and we're working on all of them in some way. The first part is to preserve and achieve affordable housing through rezoning. You're going to hear a lot about that in a few minutes. The second part is to have the estimated 300 units that Columbia has in housing that is now occupied by non-affiliates. When it becomes vacant, to have it reoccupied by non-affiliates, mainly people who live in this neighborhood. The third part is to have Columbia include affordable housing in the tower that they're now building on 125th Street. The fourth part will be to work with Riverside Church, who will be presenting a development plan for that campus later this year, to have affordable housing included there. And the fifth part, most important, the largest cluster of affordable housing is in grant houses, and we want public investment in grant houses to keep it going. So this Just Housing campaign kicks off on July 10th at our community fair that you'll hear about. We will have flyers, there'll be a video, a newsletter, we'll have banners, and perhaps a rally in the fall. So please, there'll be additional information about it, but please take part as best you can in the Just Housing campaign. So I'd like to now reintroduce Dan McSweeney, who's going to talk about 2 things. The business association that we're forming now and the community fair scheduled for July 10th. Okay, Dan, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Harry. Nice to be here with everyone. I don't know if I've met everyone, but I've been volunteering and consulting with MHCC for just about 2 years now, actually volunteering for longer than that. But I want to describe 2 initiatives that we are using as a way of accomplishing 2 really important objectives. The first is to increase the sustainability of our policy efforts. And the second is to expand our diversity. We as an organization are reaching out to younger folks, folks from different kinds of backgrounds, because it takes a village, as Laura said earlier. And by engaging in these different types of activities, we feel we have a better chance of promoting the overall long-term success of everything that we've been doing. So effort number 1 you'll see here is called Morningside Merchants. The brief background on this is we informally started to survey local businesses about their needs during COVID last summer. And we got some very, very good information. And it helped us to understand that we really need to do more as a community to support local businesses. Several months after that, we were approached by the New York City Department of Small Business Services to actually conduct an official program, which we are tentatively calling, as I said, Morningside Merchants. The idea here is that we want to connect local businesses to existing city, state, and federal resources, number 1. Number 2, we want to promote them individually as businesses and also promote Morningside Heights as a vibrant and friendly shopping and dining district. That's a really important part of this thing. And then the third thing is we want to create a sustainable infrastructure for the businesses here in our neighborhood to succeed. And that's where this Small Business Association Morningside Merchants comes in. We are the incubator for it. It will be led by the businesses themselves. We're just providing a helping hand. So far, so good. We've got almost 30 registered and very enthusiastic. We're going to have our introductory event on June 15th at Hex & Company. So if you'd like to attend, please get in touch with us through our email, and I will put you on our list. This is a way for us to show our support for local businesses. It's the first of many events to come. The second thing I want to mention is this community resource fair that Harry alluded to, and so did Dave. COVID obviously has been a big impact on the neighborhood, and it's caused a lot of people to really move inside, as we all know, because of all of the sequestration that's occurred. And now is the time for us, as COVID guidelines allow, for us to come back and reunite as a neighborhood. And we were thinking that a really good way to do this would be through what we're calling the Community Resource Fair. It's an opportunity for us to come together as neighbors, as community members, and to reunite, basically. So it's a 21st century version of a good old-fashioned block party, basically. So not only will we have entertainment through music, through street games, through speakers, but we'll also have resources, many of which are provided by the recipients of the Morningside Heights Community Fund grants that Dave alluded to earlier.
Thank you, Dan. Dan has done amazing work around these issues, particularly around the Merchants Association. We're very, very excited about that. So now to the main event. Our first commentator for the evening is Robert Stern. He's a vice president on the executive committee of Morningside Heights Community Coalition, and the person who's done most of the work, or led us to do most of the work on the rezoning plan. He's created report after report. They're all on our webpage, and I hope you go to it. And then Robert has been the backbone of this thing. And so he's going to give a little bit of a presentation on the context for why we decided to go after this rezoning plan, or create a rezoning plan.
Thank you, Laura, very much. It's great to be with all of you tonight. I wanted to begin on behalf of the Morningside Heights Community Coalition. I want to thank Community Board 9 as a co-sponsor of the study, and Barry Weinberg for giving his time and expertise to helping develop the study. And I also want to thank Community Board 7 members, particularly former board chair Mark Diller and Land Use Committee member Seema Reddy for participating in the early study iteration discussions and for providing your wonderful meeting space. And I want to recognize all the MHCC committee members who gave their time and passion in street tabling, workshops, town halls, reports, petitions, and surveys. Your contributions are highlighted in the study. We showed all work. I especially want to thank our council member, Mark Levine, as a champion for MHCC and rezoning, and his team, particularly his chief of staff, Aya Keefe, along with Eric Cuello, for their consistent involvement in helping move the process forward. Mark and his team arranged many meetings with city planning and then worked to gain support from Corey Johnson to allocate resources to develop the formal study. Similarly, co-sponsor Gail Brewer and her team have consistently been engaged. Along with Mark Levine, Gail participated at all our town halls and workshops and continually cheered our efforts. And I know Gail read our memos and reports along the way because she let us know it. I also want to thank our State Assembly member Danny O'Donnell for participating at our meetings and, as always, providing guidance and support along with our State Senator Brian Benjamin. And finally, thank you to Andrew Lassiter, who you'll be hearing from in a little bit. He's a project leader from the City Council Land Use Division, and to the land use team headed by Raju Mann. Andrew was planner, advisor, guide, liaison, arbitrator, editor, without whom this study would not have been feasible and an essential step on the road to rezoning Morningside Heights. So to start, a little bit about who we are. Of course, if you don't know us, we were founded in 2016 in response to out-of-scale development without affordable housing. A lot of us are the same people who were responsible for the Morningside Heights Historic District Committee and that historic designation in the lower portion of Morningside Heights. Primary mission: promote affordable housing, limit out-of-scale development, and of course, preserve the character and quality of life in Morningside Heights. Here you see a picture of our own Dave Robinson tabling, collecting petition signatures, most likely for rezoning. If you go on our website, you'll find 1,000 signatures that we've collected. These are paper and pen, not Change.org online, that we collected and that we sent to Mayor de Blasio, Department of City Planning, and all of our elected officials. So we tried to capture the aspiration of our neighbors from what we heard, from speaking with them, from our surveys, from our committee meetings, etc. And the study really, I think, captures these aspirations. Promote new affordable housing under the mandatory inclusionary housing rule. This is a mechanism that's available to us. We wanted to eliminate, as of right, rezoning. The Morningside Heights rezoning is long overdue. As you may know, the upper portion north of 125th Street was rezoned, and the area below 110th Street was rezoned. So Morningside Heights became this oasis for overdevelopment by luxury developers, and we're trying to control that type of overdevelopment and promote affordable units. We want to sustain hundreds of rent-stabilized units that we feel are at risk. And we want to, of course, limit the luxury towers, but by imposing height caps. We want to increase community negotiating leverage. What kind of buildings? What amenities are in these buildings? Could there be a senior center? Could there be a community center? Could there be a performing arts center? We want to foster greater small business activity and opportunities. Obviously, we know that mom and pop businesses are suffering, but there are entire areas of the community that could use small business activity along the street to provide action on the street. We want to preserve the unique character of Morningside Heights, of course, and we're very proud. We want to have a community-led, grassroots, bottom-up plan, working closely with City Council. We believe this is a win-win for city government and Morningside Heights residents. So often, these plans come down from up high, from Department of City Planning, working with developers. The community is unaware, they've had no input or very little, and there are a lot of objections, as you are well aware of reading about a lot of these things. And finally, hopefully we're successful. This will be a model for other communities to work with our grassroots model to develop their own plans. So how did we collect some of this information? How did we communicate with residents in the community? Well, first of all, we held a workshop in January 2017 at Corpus Christi Church. About 150 people showed up. You can see a picture on the left. We set up tables with facilitators at each table, and we handed out flyers and forms to fill out regarding how they felt about the neighborhood: affordable housing, transportation, small businesses, etc. And we collected all of that information. On the right, you see someone looking at an exhibit at one of these workshops of the Soft Site Report. The Soft Site Report was released in 2016, and it captured what we believe are vulnerable sites that we feel were vulnerable to overdevelopment and luxury housing or luxury towers. Over 20 sites that we identified. A number of those sites that we identified are now, what you'll find when Andrew presents the study, are some of the key development sites in the zoning plan. So what came out of the workshop? These are some of the headlines that we captured. Morningside Heights needs to preserve a small town environment, maintain quality of life. Institutional overdevelopment is creating a dead community. As you know, a number of the institutions, JTS, UTS, Columbia, they've either sold development rights to developers or building large-scale buildings themselves without any affordable units. They want truly affordable housing. The schools are overcrowded. We need a new school for the 21st century. Apartment rental prices soaring, middle classes are priced out. We were told by students from Columbia, for example, they graduate, they'd love to live in the neighborhood, can't afford it. Rezoning is needed to promote contextual development. Transportation needs upgrade. We'll hear more about that a little later. More buses, more trains, but in particular, elevators for elderly and those with disabilities, improvements to the 125th Street station, but also the 110th Street station, hoping that rezoning will trigger mandates for transit accessibility improvements. Very important. Felt that tall towers are robbing Morningside of light, air, and space. Well, all we're getting are luxury towers. Folks, if we do nothing, all we will get are luxury towers. There's overdevelopment of walking space. Mom and pop stores are disappearing. We all know that, of course. And there was a very big concern about construction safety. We've been a big construction zone for a while, and a lot of the safeguards are not being followed by construction crews. Unfortunately, we have documentation of open pits that are unsupervised, that a child could walk in, or diesel trucks spewing fumes, or trucks going the wrong way down a one-way street without any supervision in a school zone. So people are quite concerned about that. So as some of you know from our other meetings, we've held a number of discussions with Jewish Theological Seminary and Union's Theological Seminary and Columbia and the other institutions, and that JTS sold land and air rights for over $100 million, as well as UTS also sold land and air rights for over $100 million. And we wanted to ensure that there was some affordable housing included, that the community had a say. And after many meetings with Jewish Theological Seminary, they basically said, no, we have no control over this. So we held a protest in April. You can see that Brian Benjamin, Gail Brewer, Danny O'Donnell, and Letitia James, who was then public advocate, all participated at this protest. I think you can make out Barry Weinberg. I see Brian Benjamin, and I see Gail Brewer there in the center. You're now familiar as these buildings are going up. We had predicted this would happen, and sure enough, it has. We feel that there are around 800 new units in development. 0 of them are affordable. Here's an example, 100 Claremont Avenue. This is the UTS site that is going up directly on the UTS campus. It is 40 stories, designed by Robert A.M. Stern, of course, the other Robert Stern, and it is taller than the tower at Riverside Church. On your right, you see the Vanderwater. Near completion, this was the result again of the sale of land and air rights by Jewish Theological Seminary. The Vanderwater, as you can see, totally out of scale, out of context with the adjacent buildings, is all luxury. Right now, studios are going for $1 million, 3 bedrooms for around $6 million. We met with Chris Schlank, who is the president of Savannah. That is a real estate investment trust, the owner of and developer of the Vanderwater. And we asked him to include affordable housing, or why can't he do it? And he said, well, it's possible, but it just isn't feasible. In his business model, it just wouldn't allow for it. So essentially, because it's as of right, they weren't mandated to include any affordable housing. So what did we do next? Well, we filed a zoning challenge to Savannah. We actually hired George James, who is the expert, the go-to guy to do zoning challenges. And he thought there was an excellent case. In fact, he gave us an enormous discount that he usually charges about 3 times as much as he charged us, because he believed so strongly in the case to be made here. Here you see a particular example where the sky exposure plane is broken by a facade. And also, one of the main contentions was that the Savannah had misrepresented the use of public space. After 75 days, the Department of Buildings, without a word, just dismissed the challenge. Almost all zoning challenges are dismissed or lose in court. So what do we do next? Well, we decided to develop our own zoning study, our own zoning plan. And with subcommittees and action committees and talking to various folks and with pencil and paper and maps, we mapped out, taking all of the input we had of what would be the ideal zoning that would meet the aspirations of the community. And we wrote it all down. And then Barry Weinberg, who is, of course, Community Board 9 chairman, created a Google Earth block by block view. So presenting a zoning plan. So on the left, you see Barry presenting it. On the right, you see a sample. This happens to be between 111th and 112th Street on Broadway on the west side. If you look at, you can see on the corner is the Citibank, then a number of small buildings that are all individually owned by small landlords. And the last one was the, used to be the Bank Street Bookstore, then it became a Vanderwater showroom, and also housed at one point the Columbia Film Department. The red shows that there could be a 17-story building here. It was proposed for R9A that we thought at the time would trigger mandatory inclusionary housing. The goal again here is to create some density, increased density along the avenues so that we can trigger mandatory inclusionary housing while limiting the scale with height limits in other areas of the neighborhood. You'll see in the formal presentation that Andrew's going to make that this actually went to R10A. R9A was not sufficient to trigger mandatory inclusionary housing. So after many meetings with Department of City Planning, including the top people for the Manhattan area, and Marissa Lago, chair of City Planning and chair of the City Planning Commission, through Mark Levine's office, with the help of Aya Keefe, we had a walk around Morningside Heights where we gave a tour to City Planning and showed the various issues and why that they needed to commit resources to rezone Morningside Heights. In this picture, I took the picture, so I'm there too, helping with the tour. But on the left, you see Raju Mann. He is the director of the City Council Land Use Group. There you see Mark Levine, of course. Then Marissa Lago, chair of City Planning. To her right is Aya Keefe, chief of staff to Mark Levine. And of course, to her right, Gail Brewer. And after this meeting, we met at the Forum, the new Columbia building, and had a very, what we thought, a productive discussion where we thought they kept engaging with City Planning, they might come around. On September 19th, 2019, we held a meeting at Corpus Christi Church, similar to a kind of town hall we're holding here tonight. Of course, we were in person, and we had invited through Mark Levine's office Speaker Johnson, and we were hoping that he would say something positive. It turns out that same day, City Planning, Marissa Lago, chair of City Planning, issued a letter to me as part of MHCC, to Mark Levine, and to Gail Brewer, saying that they would not commit resources for the rezoning of Morningside Heights. Corey Johnson addressed the crowd and he said, I've just spoken with Mayor de Blasio and he is rescinding the letter from City Planning. And then he said the following, and I'll quote him because I think he describes the plan very well. So here's what he said at the meeting. It's a picture of him saying it. So Mark and I have been talking about this for a while, and I've said to Mark that anything you need me to do to help fix this problem, I'm happy to do so. And one of the things I find most interesting and wonderful about the work that has been done here by this coalition is that, some elected officials say, some communities don't like change and they don't want anything to get done. That's not happening here. This coalition, this community coalition came together and said, let's figure out a thoughtful, responsible way to have smart growth, real growth that works for the community. Luxury condominiums that speculators are counting on actually hurt the community. Luxury, let's do something that makes sense, and that's to protect the mid-block, add a little more density on the avenues. Let's get some upgrades to the subway stations for accessibility, and that's a sensible way to handle these issues. And that's what this plan is. This plan is a responsible way to handle this area, referring to Morningside Heights, that was left out of the other rezonings. And since that day, we've been working, or shortly thereafter, we've been working with the City Council Land Use Group, with Andrew Lassiter as our main contact, which you'll hear from in a few moments. Let's see. And I just wanted to talk about some of the next steps. So like tonight, we're going to continue to conduct briefings with the community, with stakeholders and influencers. One of the barriers to continuing is that we need to complete an environmental assessment statement. And the assessment statement looks at things like transit density, light, air, impacts on water, sewage, social economic conditions, etc. It is an essential component of the uniform land use review process, which we must go through. And we had the funding for it, and RFPs were issued to consultants who specialize in doing environmental assessment statements, but COVID intervened. And the funding that we had was appropriately was allocated to emergency COVID relief. But now, as we're coming out of this and we feel that there may be new funding available, we're working very closely with Corey Johnson's office and other entities to try to move this forward and bring those consultants on board. We wanted to be able to complete this all by the end of the year. It looks like we're going to go into another cycle and work with other folks, but hopefully those are the people who've been supporting us all along. And finally, have approval of the rezoning plan by council vote. So if you'll hold all your questions till the end after Andrew has a chance to present, I'll turn it over to him. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you to everyone here for coming out tonight to hear about this rezoning framework. Just a moment while I pull up my screen here. Okay, Robert, can you see the slide full screen here?
I see you and the slide.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks. Don't always know when that's going to work. So as Robert said, I'm Andrew Lassiter. I am an urban planner with the City Council Land Use Division. And I believe, as was mentioned before, we also have my colleague Lizette Chaparro from Borough President Gil Brewer's office here with us tonight. And this team of the City Council and the Borough President, along with a lot of support from Community Board 9, has had the good fortune of working with MHCC leadership, including Robert, Laura, Dave, Harry, and Barry, and others over the past few years. And we've really admired and been humbled by all of their work. I mean, really all of the thought and energy and just conversation that they have put into this is really astounding. And it's been a pleasure to be able to try and support it. You know, MHCC has put so much work into this. I think as representatives of elected officials, we are really trying to just lift up the work that MHCC has done and try to see if we can bring it to reality. So this planning study that I'll give you some more information about here, and the zoning framework that is a part of it, that's what we're attempting to do. So Robert has already covered, I think, a lot of the history that's on the slide here. So I think I'll just jump to the fourth part, which starts about 1.5 years ago. when this group and MHCC, as Robert mentioned, decided together to try a different route to a rezoning. And it's a pretty unprecedented one in terms of rezonings, where stakeholders would be the ones leading and then applying for the rezoning instead of the city or developers, which is how it usually works. So in the past year and a half, we've done our best to support MHCC and try to flesh out their ideas into a package that lays out a clear rezoning rationale and then could ultimately move forward as an application process with DCP. As Robert mentioned, we are still fairly early in this in terms of it still needing an environmental review process and then eventually going through ULURP. But yeah, we believe this is a solid common sense approach to rezoning. And now we're at a point where we're looking to get feedback from the community more broadly. So let me run through first what some of the issues are that we're responding to with this proposed rezoning. I think for many of you, this will not be news, but to highlight the need for affordable housing here. Rents in Community District 9 continue to go up faster than in the rest of the city. Meanwhile, profits for landlords continue to rise, even as they've dipped elsewhere in the city. At the same time, rent stabilized unit turnover is among the highest in the city. And the community board has identified affordable housing as a top priority, rightfully so. Just to look at one angle of the issue, incomes here are lower than city averages, but at the same time, rent burden rates are higher. And rent burden, for those who aren't familiar, meaning the percentage of people who are paying, I believe, over 30% of their income towards rent. Then at a more local scale, the northernmost part of Morningside Heights has a dense cluster of rent stabilized housing that we feel is crucial to protect. Demographically, this area has a substantially higher percentage of Hispanic, Black, and Asian residents, and a substantially lower percentage of white residents compared to the rest of the Morningside Heights area. Economically, the median household income of around $40,000 is half that of the rest of the neighborhood. Moving to the southern part of the neighborhood, the demographics skew far more white and higher income, with smaller proportions of Asian and Black residents than the rest of the neighborhood. The median household income here is more than double the northernmost part of the rezoning area that we just looked at, and over 50% higher than the citywide median. However, at the same time, you can still see, just like in that northern part of the neighborhood, at the bottom of the slide here, how rent burden levels are still quite high in this part of the neighborhood as well. Another issue, of course, out of context development remains an issue and a serious concern for potential development sites in the neighborhood. Robert already walked us through some of these, so I won't belabor that point. But I think here's one of the key points, is that we think that the zoning in Morningside Heights, which hasn't been updated since around 1961, really has a lot to do with some of these issues that we're looking at. Nearly every corner of the neighborhood is zoned R8 and hasn't had a contextual rezoning to add height limits like other surrounding neighborhoods. And you can see on the map there at the left in pink are areas around Morningside Heights that have had contextual rezonings to add height limits for new development. And Morningside Heights is kind of the hole in that donut. Councilmember Levine has called this situation the worst of both worlds, where you have wildly out of scale towers without any new affordable housing being built. And the last issue to highlight is the C1 commercial overlays The commercial overlays along Broadway and Amsterdam are also pretty outdated, and they make it harder than necessary to open or sustain a business. Beyond that, a long stretch of Broadway, as you can see in the photo there at the left, around 123rd Street, has no commercial overlays, which can lead to blank walls and pedestrian dead areas like you see here, and leaves the handful of spaces that are grandfathered in as retail spaces in precarious positions anytime there's a change in tenant. So our goals for the rezoning flow out of those core needs: protecting rent stabilized clusters, producing new affordable housing, preserving contextual character, and encouraging retail on commercial corridors. So I'm going to go through the actions that we'll take to hopefully achieve each of those goals one at a time. So starting with the protection of rent stabilized units. We aim to help protect these clusters by modestly reducing allowable height and density in two very carefully targeted areas that meet all of the criteria you see with the orange bullets at right, which we'll go through in just a second, in areas of the neighborhood that are markedly lower income and lower density. And we know that zoning alone won't ensure protection of rent stabilized units here, but we do believe it can help. So the way that we identified which areas to target with a slightly lower density to help protect rent stabilized units is we went through these 5 criteria. The first was areas of the neighborhood where there is a concentration of rent stabilized units. The second was to look at areas where there are no existing regulatory protections, like a historic district that already offers some level of protection against redevelopment of those buildings. The third criteria was areas where there's substantial unbuilt floor area that can be attractive for redevelopment. So these are areas where what is built is not as big as what could be built. And those types of properties can be the kind that are attractive for redevelopment. The fourth was areas with a high rate of units that are being destabilized. And the fifth was areas where there is an existing built form that won't result in non-compliant buildings due to the downzoning. Basically, we believe it can be helpful to slightly reduce the density to disincentivize redevelopment, but we also don't want to unfairly burden property owners by making the building that they already have non-compliant with zoning. That didn't seem fair. So what we propose, as you saw on the map, are 2 different R7 zoning districts. One is R7D, which allows 4.2 floor area ratio, which is the amount of floor area per the size of the site that's allowed there, with a maximum height of about 10 stories. And we also proposed R7X zoning for the areas that had slightly higher, larger buildings already. R7X allows a residential floor area ratio of 5 with a maximum height around 12 stories. And just to look at one last angle of this, this topic, this map shows the existing built floor area ratio, so essentially the existing density in those proposed R7 contextual zoning district areas. And I know it's a little small probably and hard to read, but the redder it is, the denser the site is. So just to point out here, the average built FAR on these blocks is 4.15, which is lower than either of the districts that we're proposing, but fairly close. And on these blocks, there's around 860 rent stabilized units. This is tough data to get accurate, but that's the estimate that we have for those blocks. Okay, our second proposed zoning action to create new affordable housing is to map R9A and R10A districts adjacent to the 125th and 110th Street subway stations, which would increase density in these two locations that you can see on the map there in kind of orangish and brownish, and trigger the mandatory inclusionary housing, or MIH, requirements, which on average require about 25% of new units be affordable for any new development. And I'll just say, both of the community boards that this touches, Community Board 7 and 9, have really spoken poignantly about the need to add affordable housing in their districts. And I think as elected officials, representatives, we agree that doing so in high opportunity areas, that is areas with excellent access to transit, employment opportunities and services, furthers the communities and these elected officials' goals for fair housing policy that aligns with federal fair housing imperatives. I'll also note that upzoning to R9 and R10 in these two targeted areas would also make them eligible for DCP's proposed, although it's not approved yet, zoning for transit proposal, which would incentivize developers to build subway stations, to build subway station accessibility improvements, such as new elevators at the subway stations adjacent to or near the new development. So within these upzoned areas, we identified 4 sites that appear like they could be likely to be redeveloped if we were to rezone to R9 and R10. So I'll just go through those quickly one at a time. The first is at the southeast corner of Broadway and 125th Street. There's currently a Dwayne Reed and a handful of other retailers here. You're probably familiar with it. It's a large building right below the 125th Street subway station. It's currently a 1-story building built to 0.9 floor area ratio. It was built in 1957 and the current zoning is R72. So we'll take a look at what could be built here under what we're proposing, which is R9A with, again, mandatory inclusionary housing, or MIH, which is what we're proposing for all 4 of these projected development sites. So under that proposed zoning, this site could be built to 8.5 FAR and 17 stories. For all of these projected development sites, we assume that there'd be ground floor retail because they're on Broadway. And for this site, we estimate that around 353 residential units could be built under this proposed zoning. And if we assume 25% of those would be affordable, that would be 88. So contrast that with what can currently be built on the site if the property owner should choose to, which is 141 units approximately, none of which would have to be affordable. Just a note on the unit projections, once we go through the environmental review process, we'll have much more precise estimates on the number of units that could be produced. These are just ours based on the information and knowledge that we have, but they're not precise. The second projected development site is at 2861 Broadway. It's at the northwest corner of 111th Street and Broadway. Currently, there's 4 buildings, around 2 to 3 stories here. And the current zoning is R8. So again, we'll look at what could be built under what we're proposing here, which is R10A zoning with MIH. And I'll just note that R10A with MIH will apply in this presentation to this site and to the next 2 sites after that. So what could be built here under that proposed zoning is 12 FAR and up to 23 stories. And we estimate about 245 total units could be built. About 61 of those would be required to be affordable. And again, contrast that with what can be built presently, which is 138 units approximately, none of which would be required to be affordable. There's also currently no height cap on this site. So the developer would be able to build as tall as they want, as long as it fits within the zoning envelope, just as we saw with some of the other towers that have gone up in the neighborhood. The third projected site is at 2825 Broadway at 110th Street, currently a two one-story buildings. And the current zoning is R9A with voluntary inclusionary housing, or VIH, which offers the opportunity for the developer to build affordable housing, but does not require it. What could be built under R10A, which we're proposing, is again, the same FAR and height as the previous site, and we projected about 278 total units, 70 of which would be affordable. So the comparison here to what's currently allowed is a little bit different here because voluntary inclusionary housing is currently mapped. It's really difficult to estimate how many affordable units would be produced under voluntary inclusionary housing because it's actually subject to negotiation between the developer and the city. So it's notoriously difficult to forecast, but we tried to sketch it out, and our estimate is somewhere around 190 total units, and 38 of those being affordable is what could be produced under voluntary inclusionary housing. And the last projected development site is a little bit smaller. It's a one-story building, currently also R9A with voluntary inclusionary housing. So the same VIH criteria apply to this site. And what could be built here under R10A, same FAR and height cap as the previous 2 sites, and we project around 150 total units and 38 affordable units could be built here. And again, comparing that to what could presently be built under VIH, somewhere around 102 total units and just 20 affordable. Our third zoning action is a contextual rezoning. So what this does is places a height cap on any new development to ensure that it remains in context with its neighboring buildings. So that height cap would be 17 stories on wide streets like Broadway and Amsterdam and a few others, and 12 stories on narrow streets. The wide narrow street thing is a bit technical, so I won't go into it now, but happy to address it in the Q&A if people have questions. What you can see on the map is the light orange is where we're proposing the R8A. That's on narrow streets, those areas. And the R9A is on wide streets. And essentially this is attempting to place a height cap in these areas while not increasing the allowable density or increasing it by a negligible amount, just according to what's available to us in the zoning code. And our final proposed zoning action is C2 commercial overlays up and down Amsterdam and Broadway. This includes mapping a new overlay on Upper Broadway, where you have those pedestrian dead zones, in an effort to potentially create new retail establishments. And also upgrading existing overlays from C1 to C2. to increase options for property owners to have uses like theaters, bike repair shops, and small amusements that currently are not allowed today. Okay, so wrapping up here, where we're at in the process. As we discussed, I encourage you all to take a look at the planning study, which presents all of this information in much more exhaustive detail. We also just completed presentations, briefings to Community Board 9 and Community Board 7 land use committees. We're completing the, really excited to be in the town hall now. And as Robert said, we're excited to continue talking with interested stakeholders, giving presentations, whatever helps answer questions and get people excited about this proposal. And then on kind of the back end, we continue seeking funding for an EAS. And I think as an applicant team, our role is just to kind of maintain communication with the Department of City Planning to make sure that once we are able to start moving forward with the EAS, we're ready to dive into a pre-application process with DCP as well. And I'll leave it here. This is just a summary slide of what some of the key outcomes of the proposed rezoning would be. And you have a map there that shows you what each of the proposed zoning changes is. So where it says, for example, R8 to R8A, R8 is the current zoning and we're proposing R8A. So leave it there. I think we have a question and answer session. And I'm happy to answer any questions and comments that you have.
How can we have more information about how residents of our community are being treated who cannot afford housing?
I'm going to jump in. I think that it's an excellent question. And it's an excellent question for communities across New York City, but particularly right here in Morningside Heights. And I think that we have to work together as a community to try and get the supports that are needed to get permanent housing for our residents that are in temporary shelters like the Ellington. And one of the ways that we can achieve that is through getting affordable housing.
No, I'm just concerned about, people in the neighborhood who've not heard about what's going on and what kind of information sources we have and how we can relate to this process.
That's a great question. Robert, do you want to?
Sure, thank you, Laura. So first of all, Galvin, thanks for the question. I'm sure there are a number of people who are not tuned in to the issues about affordable housing and rent stabilization, preserving those.
What's the question though?
And sorry, you need to mute yourself, otherwise it's crosstalk.
Was that me?
I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, let me just add while I'm here. Is how high can the buildings go? I'll mute now. Sorry.
Okay. So first of all, I just want to address that. Of course, a number of people have not heard about it. We're making an effort now, of course, to make people more aware. We've been holding meetings about rezoning. We've sent out flyers. We've sent out emails to many people. We've expanded our mailing list as much as possible. We're delighted that we were able to capture you tonight, and so you can take this information and spread the word, and we're going to go and do some more of these presentations, of course. The building heights there right now are an R8. The maximum would be 12 stories that could be built. As we know that these are small stores individually owned by different landlords. Under R10A, it could go up to 22 or 23 stories high. Okay, but that would mean that we would have affordable units. If we do nothing, you will get a 40-story all luxury building there, just like we've seen in the northern section, and just like we've seen in the CB7 area where the aerial east and west went up on 100th Street that enraged people and motivated them to rezone their area. And they were inspirational to us in many ways to try to rezone our area. And we want to work with everybody as much as possible. So it's not an issue of how tall it will be. A developer, a luxury developer will come in and use as of right, meaning they can combine air rights and lots to go well above the current zoning limit, which has not changed since 1961, and create a 40-story luxury tower.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a developer looking at this site, like where are we in the process?
So
Are you just talking about potentially rezoning to protect the area, or is there something really being contemplated currently?
there are two elements to this. One is, yes, we want to protect the area. We want to preserve rent stabilized units. We want to also prevent super luxury towers from going up. So we want something modest along the avenues that will also generate affordable units. Is there a particular developer there? They're always looking. They were looking a while back, we heard, but we don't have a specific one in mind for that particular site. Again, there are 4 different small landlords who own those buildings there, including the Citibank, by the way, is privately owned. It's not owned by Citibank, by the way. I could name them all for you if you like. You can go to our soft site report. It's actually in the zoning study. It's also on our website. And you can see individually the information about each of these buildings and who owns them. And nothing has changed in many years. Part of the reason why we want some rezoning to build up certain areas like on 110th Street, it's an area that is a sort of a strip mall that is potential for affordable housing. I don't think anyone is in love with that site. But the problem is that nothing has been built on that site for 13 years, even though it had been proposed for affordable housing, voluntary, inclusionary housing. We feel we can do much better on that site in particular. On the northern part on 125th Street, there actually is a developer who owns those sites, at those low-level buildings by 125th Street subway. He's met with us and at the Community Board 9 meetings, and so he is engaged and he could be ready to go. I can't speak for him really, but the zoning will impact how he develops his site and how much affordable housing he includes.
Thank you.
Great, thanks up. And next up is Dave Robinson.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I have both a question and a comment. The comment really has to do with the fact that the northern area of the Heights has really been hit by the overdevelopment that we've seen with the tower of Vandewater and the UTS tower that is going up and is right next to the Riverside Church Tower and is going to be an eyesore for us. So we're very concerned that something be done to stop this. We're very pleased that this plan has gone as far as it has. My question for Andrew really is is a detailed one, having been part of the group that's worked on this. The block I live on, 121st Street, along with our neighboring block of 122nd Street, are very vulnerable to further overdevelopment, and we're wondering why the zoning for our particular blocks it allows for higher buildings than do the most of the other blocks in the community. And I also want to thank Andrew for all the great work on this.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dave. And let me go to this slide where we can just zoom in on that a little bit. I think it's this one. So we tried to find a way where we could apply, actually I'm going to switch to a different slide for just a second. We tried to find a way that we could apply these 2 different R7 zoning districts in a way that is as proportional and closely fitting as possible to what is already there. So as I mentioned earlier, the R7D zoning is a little bit lower density and a little bit lower height cap. R7X is a little bit more dense and a little bit higher height cap. So what we tried to do is apply those two districts in the areas where they most closely fit what is already there. So I mean, I think even just looking at this with the naked eye, you can see that, for example, that block between 122nd and 123rd has a lot more yellow. So that's a lot more buildings that are less dense below 4 FAR. And a similar thing applies to this block between Tiemann Place and LaSalle. It's just a little bit lower density. And so in order to try and most appropriately fit a new zoning district onto that area, we tried to match it as closely as we could.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for the work that you're doing. I agree that 23 stories is better than 40 stories, but it's still, you know, twice as high as what is kind of the general height in this neighborhood. I just wondered, how do you come to 23 and to 17? It does seem like it could be pretty high.
Andrew, do you want to talk about the differences, why we need to trigger it? And
yeah, sure. So the first part of that question is about the areas that are proposed for an upzoning, right? Which would be the southern part of the neighborhood, you know, that R10A with a 23-story maximum height. So the reason for that choice is that in order to trigger mandatory inclusionary housing, which is really the only zoning tool we have that requires that developers of new buildings build affordable housing, in order to trigger that, we have to increase the allowable density of the site by somewhere around like a third of what's currently allowable. That's the thing that then provides the incentive to the developer to still build there, even though they have to build all this affordable housing. So we are proposing upzoning to R10 specifically because it's the only zoning district that increases the density by enough to trigger that affordability requirement. And then the A, so R10A, is what gives it the height cap. So there are zoning districts, there are just R10 that don't have any height cap, but we knew it was important to the community, certainly, to make sure that we're still constraining the height of the buildings. The other part of your question, I think, was about the contextual zoning districts that would allow 17-story buildings. So let me go to that slide. So this is a little bit different reasoning. So in all of these areas that you see highlighted on the map here, they're all currently zoned R8, which means, as Robert has emphasized, right, like the new buildings there can be built as tall as the developer can build and keep it within that that sky exposure plane, as it's called. But we've seen that that developers can get them pretty high before they hit that. So what we're trying to do in these areas is change the zoning to a new district that keeps the density that's allowed the same, but adds a new height limit. So the districts that are available to us in the zoning code that do that keep the density the same, but add a height limit are R8A and R9A, which are what give you those, I think, 15 and 17-story height limits. I know it's technical. I hope that answers your question.
Well, I guess it does. I don't,
Yeah.
in other words, you're saying 21 stories or 18 stories would not trigger the affordable housing requirement on that particular, on the sites on the southern part of Morningside Heights. That's why it has to be 23.
That is correct. Yeah, I mean, I think the general idea here is like, we chose the most restrictive zoning district possible, like the lowest height possible to achieve what we're trying to do. And like, of course, those buildings will be tall, and not everyone's going to be thrilled about that. And we understand that. But we do think that we're doing something really valuable here, and creating, you know, the potential for real affordable housing.
I just want to point out, if I could just, hi, can anyone hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just want to point out, you know, when we're talking about affordable housing, you know, there's also, when we're talking about people being displaced from the Ellington, we're not necessarily talking about people who are displaced from the Ellington. Those people require certainly supportive housing at some point. And that's a whole other issue where the neighborhood needs supportive housing. But Andrew referred to the area median income earlier. Right now, the area median income for 2021 for a family of four is about $119,000. The way it's done is with the allocation of affordable units. And again, we don't decide this. This is sort of arbitrarily decided. And there's a lot of backlash about how the area median income is determined. It isn't right, but again, it is the rule that we need to work with. So for example, if you make 60% of the units that are affordable to a family, that would be a family that's earning, a family of four, that would be earning approximately $71,000 a year. A two-bedroom apartment at 60% AMI would be around $1,400. Right? That's what we're looking at here, to create greater diversity in our neighborhood so that people who work here can live here, and that people can really afford to live in New York. So it requires some greater density along the avenues and to save the rent stabilized units in some of the side streets. That's one of the major goals.
Yes, thanks. So I have a question about the Claremont Avenue corridor, which I think is on screen showing as R8 to R7X or so. I thought that it was said earlier that that might be a 10-story to 12-story area. So I just wanted to understand the idea for that area. International House proposed an 8-story building, which they said that they were sort of limited by their nonprofit status. And then the building across the street on LaSalle, so across from, it's the one that's 4.72, that LaSalle and Claremont corner, that one tried to build up from its current 6 stories to 7 stories at some point to make a penthouse and was slapped down. So right now, I mean, my understanding is some of these buildings are limited by, you know, the width of LaSalle Street and things like that, such that they can't build up. So that seems maybe like a happy place. So I'm just wondering why we are raising the limits, if I understood correctly, on the Claremont corridor. Like what's the intent there? If there's already a potential disincentive for the developers to build up.
Andrew, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and I think this is what you meant, but just to clarify, we're reducing the allowable density on the site. And the idea is to make sure that we're just adding a disincentive to redevelopment on these sites where there's tons of rent stabilized units. I'm familiar with the International House project that you mentioned. You'll notice that that site is not included in the proposed rezoning. But that Claremont Avenue corridor does have, you know, a lot of rent stabilized units, and also a lot of buildings that at this time are like enough apart from what is like allowed, that there could be an incentive there for redevelopment. You know, we're trying to apply zoning district to this area that obviously will play out a little bit differently for each property. Although the properties along here are fairly uniform, you can see on the map in terms of density, they're all around like between 4 and 4.5 FAR in density.
Sorry, just to clarify, so I might just be confused then. So for any of these properties along Claremont and TMN sort of area that are already at 3.4, 4.1, sorry, would the changes allow them to be higher or no?
No, the changes, the proposed changes would slightly decrease the size that they're allowed to build to if they were to build something new.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and
Great.
sorry about any confusion. Thank you.
I
All right.
want to add very briefly that MHCC has met with International House Calvin Sims and his team. This was pre-COVID, and they showed us the designs for the new building. We had identified that particular site, that garage, in our soft site report way back in 2016. So just a reminder that a lot of the sites that we identified are in fact now being developed. Had we been able to start the rezoning process earlier, we might have been able to have more of a say in the type of buildings that are going up.
Yes, thank you. My question was about the 23-story building, so I think that has been covered. And I just was going to comment that and there are a lot of buildings on Riverside that are 15 or 16 stories. So I think 17, it does maybe feel taller than we think now, but I don't think it's going to be so disruptive when it comes through. So my question's been answered.
Awesome. Moving on. Oren Alperstein, you don't think it's going to be popular. Do you got anything to add to that?
Well, there are multiple comments in the chat already. You can see that those of us living on 111th Street or near 111th Street are not very happy about it. And, you know, it does feel as though you're solving one problem, affordable housing, while creating a little bit of another problem. And while that's not an issue overall, it is an issue specifically for 111th and 110th Street. I would agree, let's get rid of those awful buildings on 110th Street. Nobody would disagree with that. But, you know, 23 stories on 111th Street is a lot more than 17, 16 or 17. And so the difference is really huge. And I think that's why you're getting so many questions about that. And so I'm wondering whether there is any kind of compromise in here. I understand that, you know, you had to go to a certain height in order to trigger the percentage, but you know, if we didn't go to that height, would that just reduce the, you know, the percentage of affordable apartments in those buildings? Or, you know, if we went to 17 stories, for example, which is the case in other parts of the neighborhood, and not 23, what kind of effect would that have ultimately?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I can answer that quickly, and then Robert, if you want, you can jump in. I think just to speak to the height and what triggers required affordable housing. So in your example, if we were to rezone to the zoning district that only allows 17 stories, as you mentioned, as we're doing in a lot of the rest of the neighborhood, the thing is no affordable housing is required if we do that. It's not proportional. It's just none. So you achieve the height cap, and that's what we're doing, you know, along other parts of Broadway and Amsterdam. But in those areas, we're not able to institute, you know, the requirement for affordable housing. It's only when we increase up that next level to R10 that we can trigger that affordable housing requirement. And also I'll just say, I think, yeah, residents of 111th, 110th Street, this is certainly close to home for you, and we would love to discuss more with you.
And I just want to add, Oren, I live on 111th Street also. Lived here nearly all my life. And I understand the concerns, but I know from evidence, plain and simple, that if we do nothing, it won't be 23 stories, it'll be 40 stories without any affordable housing, and we will continue to diminish the diversity of our neighborhood. So it is a choice that we're making. It's the integrity of the plan in order also to push it through, because we need, I believe, to have affordable unit. That is part of the purpose of rezoning, and also to limit the ultimate displacement of rent stabilized residents when rent stabilized could be destroyed in the northern section, maybe not now, maybe several years in the future. This is a plan for the next 50 years.
Okay, it's now 8:01 and we are losing participants. We're at 51.
I think, Dan, I was just going to say, I think we should take one more question and then call it, wrap it up. And everybody who has questions or has comments, please put them in the chat. We promise to get back to you to answer every concern you have. And for those of you that have been overwhelmed with information tonight, please look at the plan at your leisure, write down your questions, send them to us so that we can get back and clarify. Information is power, and we want you to really, really understand this. The questions have been fabulous tonight. It's been wonderful. So I think, Dan, one last question.
Can we do a quick compromise? One question, one comment, because there is a comment I think it's important after that. Is
Okay,
that
yes.
All right, beautiful. Francine, you're up.
Okay, I must be alone in this, but for me, 23 and 40 floors, same thing. Same as 50, same as 60. There's a point above which it doesn't really matter. So I don't see that as a compromise. I don't see that as an improvement. I understand that we have to have affordable housing, and we should. There has got to be a better way to fix that problem rather than creating more problems.
And I want to preface by saying I support this plan. Largely, I think it is a terrific opportunity. And I also appreciate the effort that's gone into it and the initiative of residents, sort of a bottom-up plan. Andrew Lassiter and I spoke earlier this week about the possibility of being able to maintain a height limit of R9A, which is about 145 feet, while still fitting in the increased density of R10A. It would be a bit of an unusual step forward, but it would enable us to keep the contextual height limit. And while I haven't done the analysis of north of 110th Street, I have done it for south of 110th Street, the two sites that are proposed along Broadway, where you can fit all of the increased density without increasing the height above 145 feet, which basically means you could keep it at about 17 stories, but still getting the increased density and still get the affordable housing, because the MIH is triggered by density, not by a height limit increase. And I haven't looked at it, but I will look at it tonight about whether we could also do the same for north of 110th Street, where you could actually, again, increase the density along Broadway and you not have 23 stories. I'm sorry, not have 23 stories, but instead have 17 stories, but still have the density, still get the affordable housing that you're looking for without being out of context for the rest of the neighborhood. It's a tiny part of an overall brilliant plan. So I've discussed it with Andrew briefly, and I'm happy to discuss it further. I just wanted to make that comment that maybe the compromise I think Francine was looking for may exist. It may require some creative thinking on the part of city planning, but I'm optimistic that we can get there. Overall, I applaud it, and I'm glad I was able to participate, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dan. I just want to say thank you to everybody tonight that's stayed on and stayed with us, asked questions, give some thoughtful input, and it's amazing. This is an amazing community. So proud to be a part of it. And I just want to say one other thing, and that is, please get involved. You know, the more people that get involved, the more, if you have a little bit of a skill, if you have a little bit of energy, if you have a little bit of both, if you have only one, we need you. Please get involved. Become part of MHCC in an active way. We consider ourselves neighbors, and it takes a village is not just a minor comment, it's a truth. So, you know, you can use those skills and you can have fun and you can meet your neighbors and you can be with us. Look at our website, mhccnyc.org. It's great. It has a lot of information. We hope to see you on July 10th at the fair on 111th Street. And most of all, I do want to say thank you to everybody who participated, Andrew and Robert for putting this together, Dan for helping us, Dave, Harry. everybody that's really worked on this, Andrea. So thanks so much for being here with us tonight. This has been amazing. I'm Laura Friedman for MHCC. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay involved. Have a good night.